He thought he was being thrown away with nothing. What his father left him in that run-down shop wasn't just a second chance. It was the truth. The front door clicked shut behind me with the finality of a gavel. It was my 18th birthday. Cynthia, my stepmother for the last 6 years, stood on the other side of that door, her face a mask of strained politeness I knew was just barely concealing her relief. In my hand, I held a single, rust-pocked key. In my other, a cardboard box containing everything she deemed mine. A few changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book my dad had given me, and a photo of him and my mom, its corners soft with age. The rest of my life, the life I'd lived in that house before she arrived, had been systematically erased over the years. This was the final sweep. "Happy birthday, Leo," she'd said, her voice as thin and sharp as a shard of glass. "You're an adult now. The state doesn't require me to house you anymore." She'd pushed the box into my arms and dropped the key on top. "Your father left you his old shop in his will. It's in some town called Oakhaven. All the paperwork is with his lawyer. It's probably not worth the gas to get there, but it's yours. A pile of junk, just like he was." She didn't say it to be cruel. Not exactly. She said it because, to her, it was a simple fact, like saying the sky was blue. My father, and everything associated with him, was worthless. I was part of that association. The door closed, and I was left standing on the porch of the only home I'd ever known, feeling the cold morning air seep into my thin jacket. I was an adult. I was free. I was homeless. If you've ever felt like the world was closing in on you, like every door you knew was locking behind you, stick around. This story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started on a journey that changed everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and myself. I didn't stand there for long. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. I could feel the neighbors' curtains twitching. I walked down the driveway, the gravel crunching under my worn sneakers, and didn't look back. There was nothing to look back at. The bus station was a 3-mile walk. The box wasn't heavy, but my heart was a stone in my chest. 2 years. That's how long it had been since Dad died. 2 years of being a ghost in my own house, of eating meals alone in my room, of listening to Cynthia talk on the phone about her plans for when I was finally gone. 2 years of counting down the days to my 18th birthday with a mixture of terror and a strange, desperate hope. Now the day was here, and all I felt was the terror. Hope was a luxury I couldn't afford. The bus station was a grimy, soulless place that smelled of disinfectant and despair. I used the last of the cash I had saved from a summer job bagging groceries to buy a one-way ticket to a town I'd never heard of. Oakhaven. It sounded peaceful, but the name felt like a lie. There was no haven for me. The lawyer's name was Arthur Abernathy. Cynthia had scribbled his number on a napkin and shoved it in the box. I called him from a payphone at the station, the receiver cold and greasy against my ear. His voice was old, tired, and crackled with static. "Mr. Abernathy? My name is Leo Vance. My stepmother, Cynthia, said you had my father's will." There was a pause, a rustling of papers. "Ah, yes, Leo. Happy birthday, son. I'm sorry about the circumstances." He didn't sound sorry, he sounded resigned, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis he'd given 100 times before. "Your father, Mark, did indeed leave you his property. The welding and fabrication shop at 142 River Road, Oakhaven. The deed is here in my office. It's fully paid off. Taxes are current for the year. It's yours, free and clear." She said it was worthless. My voice was small, swallowed by the noise of the station. Another sigh from the other end of the line. "Cynthia's assessment of value is particular. The shop hasn't been operational for a few years, since before your father's final illness. It's old, It's in a rural area. From a real estate perspective, the land might be worth something to a developer someday, but the structure itself? She's not entirely wrong. But worthless? That depends on what you're looking for, I suppose. He cleared his throat. Listen, Leo. Your father was a good man. A complicated man, but a good one. He made me promise to make sure you got this key on your 18th birthday. He was very specific about that. Something in his tone shifted, a flicker of warmth in the professional chill. It was enough. Okay, I said, my throat tight. Okay. Thank you. The bus ride was 8 hours of watching the world blur past my window. The sprawling suburbs gave way to strip malls, then to farmland, then to dense forests of pine and oak that crowded the highway. The sky turned from a hazy gray to a deep, clear blue. I watched the names of towns flash by on green signs, each one a life I wasn't living, a place I didn't belong. I thought about my dad. I remembered the smell of his workshop in our old garage, not the one in Oakhaven, but the one he'd had at the house before he married Cynthia. It smelled of ozone, hot metal, and sawdust. He'd let me watch him work, his face hidden behind a heavy helmet, the world lit only by the brilliant, violent blue-white star of the welding torch. He'd seemed like a magician to me then, fusing metal together, creating things that were strong and permanent. His hands were always rough, calloused, with fine black lines of grease etched into the creases of his skin that no amount of soap could ever wash away. But they were gentle. He taught me how to hold a hammer, how to read a measuring tape, how to respect the tools. Everything has a purpose, Leo, he'd say, tapping a wrench against his palm. You just have to figure out what it is. When he got sick, it was fast. The strength in those hands vanished. The magician disappeared, replaced by a frail, tired man who spent his days in a hospital bed set up in our living room. Cynthia had been a nurse at the clinic. She was attentive, efficient. After he died, she was just as efficient in her grief and in taking over his life and mine. The workshop in the garage was cleared out and turned into her home office within a month. The tools, the benches, the smell of him, all gone. She said she'd sold it all for scrap. I guess she missed the shop in Oakhaven. Or maybe she just didn't care. The bus pulled into Oakhaven just as the sun was setting, painting the clouds in shades of orange and purple. The station was just a bench in front of a closed-down general store. The driver grunted, "End of the line, kid," and I stepped out into the quietest place I had ever been. The air was crisp and smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. The town was small, a single main street with a handful of storefronts, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a hardware store, a post office, and a lot of empty windows. It looked like a place that time had forgotten, or perhaps given up on. I asked the bus driver if he knew where River Road was. He pointed down a side street. "About a mile that way. Follow the creek. Can't miss it." He looked at my box, at my thin jacket, and his gruff expression softened for a second. "You got a place to stay?" "I think so," I said, clutching the key in my pocket. It felt colder now. He just nodded and closed the bus doors, the hiss of the air brakes sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. The bus pulled away, its red taillights shrinking into the distance, leaving me utterly alone. The walk down River Road felt like a journey to the edge of the world. The pavement quickly turned to gravel, the streetlights disappeared. The only light came from a sliver of moon and the stars, which were brighter and more numerous than I'd ever seen in the city. The sound of the creek was a constant murmur to my right, a peaceful, lonely sound. I passed a few houses with warm lights glowing in their windows, but they were spaced far apart, separated by dark fields and patches of woods. Then the houses stopped altogether. According to the faded numbers on a leaning post, this was it. 142 River Road. It wasn't a pile of junk, it was a monument to decay. The building was a long, low structure made of corrugated metal, every inch of it covered in a deep, flaky rust that looked like dried blood in the moonlight. The roof sagged in the middle, and the large garage-style door was dented and bowed. Weeds, thick as my arm, grew up through cracks in the asphalt driveway, reclaiming the space for nature. A large, faded sign hung crookedly over the door, the letters barely legible. Vance Fabrication. My name. Our name. Cynthia was right. It was worthless. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I had walked all this way, spent all my money, for this. A ruin. A tomb. I leaned against a rusted fuel drum, the cold metal seeping through my jacket, and I wanted to cry. But the tears wouldn't come. I was too empty, too tired. I had nothing left. After a few minutes of just breathing in the cold, metallic air, a strange resolve settled over me. I had come this far. I had the key. I had to see inside. It was the only thing my father had left me. I owed it to him, to myself, to at least open the door. The lock was stiff and ancient. I had to put the box down and use both hands to force the key in, my fingers numb with cold. It resisted, a stubborn gatekeeper to a forgotten kingdom. For a moment, I thought it wouldn't work. The key was a lie, just like everything else. I imagined having to sleep outside, huddled against the wall of this collapsing building. The dry humor of it all almost made me laugh. Kicked out and given a key that doesn't even work. Classic. I rattled it, pushed and pulled. Finally, with a groan of metal that sounded like a dying breath, the lock turned. The sound echoed in the stillness. I pushed the heavy door. It scraped against the concrete floor, opening just enough for me to slip through. I stepped inside and was plunged into absolute darkness. The air was thick, heavy, and cold. It smelled of oil, stale air, and something else. Something like memory. I fumbled along the wall, my hand brushing against cobwebs and flaking paint, searching for a light switch. My fingers found it, a simple, old-fashioned toggle switch. I flicked it up. Nothing. I flicked it down and up again. Still nothing. Of course. The power had been off for years. I pulled out the cheap phone I had, its battery hovering at a dangerous 15%, and turned on the flashlight. The narrow beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a world frozen in time. It was a huge space, much bigger than it looked from the outside. Giant machines, hulking metal beasts, squatted under heavy canvas tarps, their shapes like sleeping dinosaurs. Workbenches lined the walls, covered in a thick layer of dust that softened every edge, making the clutter of tools and metal scraps look like a soft, gray landscape. Metal shavings littered the floor like metallic snow. My phone's light glinted off the teeth of a giant saw blade, off the coiled hoses of an air compressor, off the smooth, worn handle of a hammer left on a vise. It was a cathedral of forgotten work. I walked deeper into the space, my footsteps the only sound. I could feel my father here. It wasn't a ghostly presence. It was in the way the tools were arranged, in the half-finished project clamped to a table, in the deliberate order hidden beneath the chaos and the dust. This was his space, a place Cynthia had never touched, had never erased. In the back corner, my light found a small, glass-paneled door. An office. I pushed it open and stepped inside. It was a small, cramped room with a single metal desk, a filing cabinet, and a chair whose vinyl seat was cracked and peeling. The desk was surprisingly clear, except for a dusty calendar on the wall, frozen on a month from 2 years ago, the month he died. And in the very center of the desk, placed with obvious intention, was a single, sealed manila envelope. My name was written on it in my father's familiar, blocky handwriting. Leo. My heart hammered against my ribs. My hands were trembling as I picked it up. The envelope wasn't dusty. It was clean. Someone had placed it here recently. Or, my dad had placed it here before he died, and the dust of the workshop simply hadn't dared to settle on it. I sat down in the cold, cracked chair, the springs groaning in protest. My phone's battery was at 10%. I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single, folded piece of paper. It was a letter. "My dearest Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, then it means two things. First, you are 18. Happy birthday, my son. I am so sorry I am not there to say it in person. I wish I could see the man you have become. Second, it means that I am gone, and that Cynthia has finally shown you the door. I'm sorry for that too. I'm sorry for so much." I had to stop reading. A knot formed in my throat so tight I couldn't breathe. His voice was so clear in my head, reading the words as I saw them. It was a voice I hadn't heard in 2 years, and the sound of it, even in my memory, was devastating. I took a shaky breath and continued. "I know you must be scared and angry. You have every right to be. I know what the last 2 years must have been like. I know you think I left you with nothing but this broken-down garage. That's what I needed everyone to think, especially her. This place looks like junk, Leo. I made it look that way. But it's not. It's a safe. And you are the key. I couldn't leave you money directly. Her lawyers would have taken it. I couldn't leave you the house. It was legally hers after we married. But this shop, this was mine long before I met her. It's tied up in a way that she could never touch it." She thinks it's a liability, a piece of useless land that would cost more to clear than it's worth. Let her think that. It kept it safe. It kept you safe. There are things here for you, a real inheritance, but you're going to have to work for it, just a little. You were always a smart kid. You see things other people miss. Look at the world I built here. Look at my tools. They all have a purpose. Remember what I taught you. Start with the heart of the shop, the place where the fire is born. Be careful, Leo. Trust your gut. And know, no matter what you have thought for the past 2 years, that I never, ever stopped loving you. I have always been proud of you. Now get to work. Your future is waiting. All my love, Dad. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through my tears. My phone's light flickered and died, plunging me back into absolute darkness. I sat there in the cold and the quiet, the paper clutched in my hand, my world completely upended. He hadn't abandoned me. He hadn't left me with nothing. This whole time, he had a plan. This derelict shop wasn't a tomb, it was a treasure chest, and he had just given me the first clue to the map. The place where the fire is born. I sat in the dark for what felt like an hour, just letting the words sink in. The grief was still there, a heavy ache in my chest, but now it was joined by something else, a flicker of hope, a spark of purpose. My dad had believed in me. He trusted me to figure this out. I wouldn't let him down. When the first hints of dawn began to filter through the grimy windows of the shop, casting long gray shadows across the floor, I could finally see the full scale of the place without the narrow beam of a flashlight. It was vast and intimidating. Tools and machinery were everywhere. What was the heart of the shop? What was the place where the fire was born? I thought back to my childhood, to watching him work. The fire, the brilliant, blinding light. It came from the welder. But there were several welding machines in the shop, all different types, all covered in tarps. Which one? I started exploring, pulling off the dusty canvases one by one. Each machine was a complex beast of dials, cables, and clamps. They were old, but looked well-maintained beneath the dust. I ran my hand over the cold steel of a TIG welder, then a massive MIG setup. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I was looking for something hidden, something that didn't belong. Then I saw it. In the center of the workshop, not against a wall but standing alone like an altar, was the biggest machine of all. It was an old arc welder, a massive, heavy-looking thing from a bygone era. It was the one he used the most, the one I remembered best. Its red paint was chipped, and its thick copper cables were coiled like sleeping snakes. This had to be it. This was the heart. I walked around it, examining it from every angle. It seemed solid, impenetrable. I tapped on its metal sides. They rang with a dull thud. I checked the dials, the connectors. Nothing. I was about to give up, to think I'd gotten it wrong, when I noticed something on the floor. Beneath the welder, almost completely hidden in the shadows, was a section of the concrete that was a slightly different color. A perfect square, about 3 feet by 3 feet. And in one corner of the square, there was a small, almost invisible hole drilled into the concrete. My heart started to pound again. A hidden compartment. Just like in the movies, but how to open it? I looked around the shop. I needed a lever, a pry bar. I remembered what he said. Look at my tools. They all have a purpose. I went to a long rack of steel rods and bars. There were dozens of them, all different lengths and thicknesses. One of them had to be the key. But which one? I started pulling them out, checking the ends. Most were just raw-cut steel. But then I found one, a long, slender piece of rebar that was different. One end had been ground down to a specific, chiseled shape, and on the other end, my dad had welded a small, crude handle. It was a custom tool, a tool with a single, specific purpose. I carried it over to the welder. It was heavy, solid. I knelt down and inserted the chiseled end into the small hole in the concrete. It was a perfect fit. Using the handle, I pulled up. At first, nothing happened. It was sealed tight. I put my foot against the base of the welder for leverage and pulled with all my strength, my muscles straining. For a second, I thought I was going to fail, that I wasn't strong enough. Then, with a low groan and a puff of dust, the concrete slab broke free. It wasn't a slab. It was a lid, a heavy concrete plug set into the floor. I dragged it aside. Beneath it was a dark, square hole. I couldn't see the bottom. A mix of fear and excitement shot through me. I was terrified of what I might find, or what I might not find. What if this was all some kind of cruel joke? I needed light. My phone was dead. I searched the office, frantically opening drawers. I found a heavy metal flashlight, the kind security guards use. I clicked the switch. Nothing. I shook it in frustration. Of course, the batteries would be dead. I opened the back and saw 2 huge D-cell batteries, their sides fuzzy with corrosion. Useless. This is a good time to pause, because I know some of you watching have been in a moment just like this. Not necessarily looking for a hidden compartment in a welding shop, but a moment where you are on the verge of a breakthrough and you hit a wall. A dead end. A moment where it feels like the universe is testing you, seeing if you have what it takes to push through. If you've ever had a moment like that, a moment that defined your resilience, I want you to share it in the comments below. Your story could be the light someone else needs to keep going. This community is built on people who understand that the most important discoveries come after the darkest moments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're finding your own strength in this story. Back in that cold, dark office, I felt that despair creeping back in. I had the map, I had the key, I had found the secret door, but I couldn't see what was inside. It felt like a final, impossible test. I slumped into the chair, my head in my hands. Think, Leo, think. What would Dad do? He wouldn't give up. He was a problem solver. He would use what he had. What did I have? A dark shop, a lot of tools, and no power. I thought about fire. I could try to make a torch, but that seemed dangerous and stupid. Then I remembered something from one of the workbenches I'd passed. Tucked away behind a grinder was a small, yellow box. I went back out into the main shop, the faint morning light my only guide. I found the box. On the side it read, "Emergency glow sticks." My hands shook as I ripped open the cardboard. Inside were 3 thick plastic sticks. I grabbed one, bent it until I heard the satisfying snap of the glass vial inside, and shook it. A faint, eerie green light began to glow, getting brighter by the second. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was hope in a chemical stick. I went back to the hole in the floor, my heart thudding. I held the glow stick over the opening and peered inside. The bottom was about 4 feet down, and sitting there, waiting for me, was a heavy, steel footlocker. It was the kind of thing you see in old army movies, painted olive drab, with heavy latches on the front. It took all my strength to haul it out of the hole. It was incredibly heavy. I dragged it across the floor into the office and heaved it onto the desk. The latches weren't locked with a padlock, but with thick cotter pins. I pulled them out with a pair of pliers from the desk drawer. I took a deep breath, and I lifted the lid. I think I was expecting gold bars or something equally dramatic. The reality was both more mundane and infinitely more profound. The box was filled with neat, plastic-wrapped bundles. Stacks and stacks of cash, 50s and hundreds. More money than I had ever seen in my life. Tucked in alongside the bundles was a thick, leather-bound journal and another manila envelope, this one much thicker than the first. I ignored the money. My eyes were fixed on the envelope. With trembling fingers, I opened it and pulled out a sheaf of papers. It was another letter from my dad, this one many pages long. I sat down, the green light of the glow stick casting an otherworldly pallor on the pages, and I began to read the truth. "Leo," it started, "if you found this, you've done it. I knew you could. I knew you had it in you. You have my eyes, my son. You see the world for what it is. Now, I need to tell you the rest of the story." He went on to explain everything. He wasn't just a simple welder who repaired fences and tractor parts, as I'd always believed. That was his day job, his cover. His real work, his passion, was artistic metal fabrication. He was a sculptor, a designer. He created custom gates for mansions, intricate lighting fixtures for architects, one-of-a-kind furniture for wealthy clients who valued anonymity. His work was sought after, and he was paid handsomely for it. The journal was his ledger. Page after page of project notes, sketches, client names identified only by initials, and figures that made my head spin. He had been successful, quietly and brilliantly successful. So why did we live like we were always struggling? The letter continued, as if he could hear my thoughts. The answer is simple. Cynthia. When I met her, I was a widower with a young son, and I was lonely. She was charming and kind, and I fell for it. After we got married, I started to see the other side of her. The spending, the debts. She had a gambling problem, Leo. A bad one. Credit cards, personal loans. She was drowning, and she was trying to pull me down with her. I tried to help her. I paid off her debts twice, but it was a hole with no bottom. I realized that if I let her, she would take everything. Not out of malice, exactly. She just couldn't help herself. It was an illness. So I made a choice. I had to protect you. I started to hide the money I was making from my private commissions. I built this place up, this shop, as my sanctuary and my vault. I funneled all the real earnings into this box, in cash. I made our life look modest, just enough to get by. I told her the big jobs had dried up, that business was slow. She believed me because it fit her narrative that I was a failure, that she had married beneath her. It was a hard game to play, son. It cost me. It cost us. I couldn't give you all the things I wanted to. I had to pretend to be a lesser man than I was. That was my biggest regret. But every dollar I put in this box, I did it thinking of you, of your future. A future free from her, free from the mess she would have made. The money in this box should be enough. Enough for college, or to start a business, or to travel the world. Enough to buy yourself a real start in life. It's your decision. It's all yours. But I hope, maybe, you'll look around this old shop and see something else I've left you. Not just the money, a legacy, a craft, a way of life. The last few pages of the journal aren't ledgers, they're plans. A project I was working on before I got sick. It was my masterpiece. The designs are all there. If you ever feel lost, maybe you can finish it for me. I love you, Leo, more than you could ever know. Everything I did to make sure you would be okay. You are my greatest creation. Be good. Be strong. Be happy. Love, Dad. I put the letter down. The green glow stick was starting to fade. The sun was fully up now, streaming through the dirty windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I wasn't in a dark, abandoned shop anymore. I was in my father's heart. I was in a place built of love and sacrifice. I cried then, not for the loss, but for the finding. I cried for the father I never really knew, the brilliant, secret artist who played the part of a simple man to protect his son. I cried for the years of misunderstanding, for thinking I was a burden when I was actually a treasure he was trying to hide. I cried with a sense of relief so profound it felt like my bones were dissolving. I wasn't an orphan kicked to the curb. I was the heir to a hidden kingdom. The money was life-changing, yes. But the letter, the truth, that was what saved me. It reframed my entire existence. My past wasn't a story of neglect and abandonment anymore. It was a story of fierce, secret protection. I spent the rest of the day in a daze. I opened the journal. The first half was filled with the meticulous records he'd described. The second half was different. The handwriting was a little shakier. The ink sometimes smudged. It was filled with breathtakingly complex drawings of a massive, tree-like metal sculpture. There were notes on metallurgy, on welding techniques, on the physics of balancing the enormous branches. It was a work of genius, a love letter to his craft. Tucked into the final page was a folded contract from the State Arts Council. It was a commission for a sculpture to be placed in the capital city's new public park. My father, Mark Vance, had won the commission anonymously. The project was on hold, pending the artist's ability to complete it. The weight of it all settled on me. The money gave me freedom. The journal gave me a purpose. My father had given me a choice. I could take the cash and run, disappear, start a new life somewhere else, and no one could blame me. Or I could stay. I could stay here, in this rusty, forgotten building, and pick up the tools he'd left for me. I could learn. I could build. I could finish what he started. That evening, a car pulled up the gravel driveway, a sleek, expensive-looking sedan that was completely out of place in this rural graveyard. A man in a sharp suit got out. He looked around at the dilapidated shop with a look of distaste. "Leo Vance?" he called out. I stepped out of the shop, squinting in the evening light. "Yes?" "My name is Richard Cole. I'm a representative for Sterling Development." He handed me a business card. "We've been acquiring land in this area for a new residential project. We're aware you just inherited this property. To be frank, it's an eyesore, and it's going to cost a fortune to demolish and clear. But we're prepared to make you a generous offer to take it off your hands. Save you the trouble." He named a number. A month ago, it would have sounded like a king's ransom. Now, knowing what was in the footlocker, it was an insult. It was a low-ball offer designed to prey on a desperate kid who didn't know any better. I looked at the man in his clean suit, and then I looked back at the rusty, beautiful shop. My shop. My home. My legacy. I knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in my soul, what my father would want me to do. What I wanted to do. "No, thank you," I said. My voice didn't shake. He looked surprised. "I don't think you understand. This is a very fair offer for a worthless piece of—" "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "The property is not for sale." He scoffed, a little smile playing on his lips. "Kid, don't be stupid. What are you going to do with this dump? Let it rot for another 20 years? I thought about the sculpture in the journal, the fire of the welder, the feel of the custom-made tool in my hand. I smiled back. "I'm going to get to work." He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head, got back in his fancy car, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. I stood there for a long time, watching the dust settle. The decision was made. I wasn't leaving. I was staying. The next morning, I made my first phone call. I found an old phone book in the office and looked up a number for a hardware store in town. I walked the mile back to the main street. The man behind the counter was old, with kind eyes and hands as calloused as I remembered my father's being. "I need to buy some batteries," I said. "D-cells, and some cleaning supplies, a lot of them." He nodded. "New in town?" "Sort of," I said. "I just inherited the old Vance fabrication shop down on River Road." The man's eyes lit up with recognition. "Mark Vance's boy? Well, I'll be. You look just like him." He leaned on the counter. "Your dad was a hell of a man, an artist with a welding torch." We all missed him when he closed up shop. The whole town did. A warmth spread through my chest. People here knew him. They respected him. He wasn't forgotten. My next call was to Mr. Abernathy, the lawyer. I told him everything. About Cynthia, about finding the box, about the developer. I could hear the smile in his voice. "I knew it," he said. "Mark was a clever man. He told me he was making a contingency plan for you, but he never told me the details. He just made me promise to make sure you got the key and the deed. Leo, this is wonderful news." I hired him to set up a proper bank account and a small business entity for me. He handled everything, protecting me, just as he had protected my father's wishes. The money was real. My future was real. I spent the next few weeks doing the hardest physical work of my life. I swept out years of dust and grime. I cleaned and oiled every single tool, learning its name and its purpose. I found the main breaker and, after a call to the electric company, the shop roared back to life. The lights flickered on, humming, illuminating the space not with a desperate glow stick, but with bright, steady light. I bought groceries. I found a small cot and set it up in the office. I was living in the shop, surrounded by the ghosts of my father's work, and I had never felt more at home. I started small. I read my father's old textbooks on welding and metallurgy. I watched countless videos online. I practiced on scrap metal, laying down clumsy, ugly welds that slowly, day by day, became cleaner and stronger. I burned myself. I got frustrated. I wanted to quit a dozen times a day. But every time I felt that doubt, I would open his journal and look at the drawings of his sculpture. I would read his letter again, and I would pick up the torch. One day, an old pickup truck rumbled down the driveway. An elderly man with a weathered face got out. "I heard Mark's boy was back," he said, extending a hand. "Name's Gus. Your dad and I used to help each other out on jobs." He became my teacher, my mentor. He'd come by a few times a week, look at my clumsy work, and show me the right way to do it. "Your dad had a feel for the metal," he'd say. "You've got it too. It's in your hands. You just gotta listen." 6 months after I arrived in Oak Haven, I sent a letter to the State Arts Council. I told them who I was and that I intended to finish my father's work. I included photos of my progress, of the shop brought back to life, of the practice pieces I'd been working on. 2 weeks later, 2 officials from the council came to the shop. They were skeptical at first, but when I showed them my father's detailed plans and the work I had started, their skepticism turned to awe. They gave me the chance. They officially reinstated the contract in my name. My father's gift wasn't the shop, or the money, or even the commission. It was a choice. It was the chance to build my own life, not from scratch, but from the strong foundation he had secretly laid for me. He had given me a legacy not of wealth, but of purpose. He saved me by showing me who I was and what I could become. The worthless pile of junk became my sanctuary, my school, and my future. If you're out there, waiting for your chance, feeling like you've been left with nothing, maybe this story is a sign that your inheritance is closer than you think. Maybe it's not in a box under the floor, but in a skill you haven't discovered, a strength you haven't tested, a truth you haven't uncovered yet. The most valuable things are rarely the ones you can see at first glance. Tell me your story. Share your story of a second chance, of finding value where others saw none, in the comments below. Your experience matters, and this community is a place where those stories are honored. And if this meant something to you, if it gave you a little bit of hope, please subscribe and become part of this journey. Let's build something strong and permanent together.